A struggling mechanic pulls over during a snowstorm to help a stranger trapped in a wrecked car. He gives her his coat, keeps her awake, and waits by her side until help arrives, never asking for her name. Days later, a black car pulls up to his garage and everything changes. The woman he rescued wasn't just anyone. And what she does next flips his world upside down. He thought it was just one act of kindness. But it was the beginning of something much bigger, something that would test his humility, unlock his future, and reveal who people really are when the world isn't watching. He didn't know her name. All he saw was a crumpled car half buried in a snowy ditch and a woman inside, unconscious, blood trailing down her cheek. It was freezing. Visibility was low and the road was empty. Most drivers wouldn't have stopped, but Marcus Reed did. He left his beat-up truck running, climbed down the icy embankment, broke the passenger window, and pulled her out with bare hands shaking from the cold. He wrapped her in his own coat, shielded her from the wind, and whispered calm words until help arrived. She was barely awake, but she remembered one thing: his voice. Gentle, steady, human. What Marcus didn't know was that the woman he saved wasn't just anyone. She was Claire Whitmore, CEO of one of the largest tech empires in the country. Comment where you're watching from, and if you believe compassion can change everything, subscribe for more stories that restore faith in humanity. He thought it ended that night. But Claire wasn't done, and what she did next would flip his entire world upside down. Marcus Reed wasn't a man of many words. At 35, his life was a steady rhythm of long shifts at the local garage, caring for his ailing mother and scraping together enough to keep the heat on through brutal winters. A small-town mechanic with rough hands and a gentle heart, Marcus had never asked for much, just enough to live quietly and do right by the people who mattered. He drove an old pickup, wore the same olive-green parka every winter, and believed that kindness wasn't something you advertised. It was something you did when no one was watching. Claire Whitmore lived in a different world entirely. At 32, she was the CEO of a tech conglomerate known in every major business journal. Wealthy, sharp, and used to commanding rooms full of powerful men, Claire had built her empire with grit and brilliance. But her success came at a cost: loneliness, guarded emotions, and a heart that trusted very few. She had escaped the city that weekend, needing air and space, tired of boardrooms and headlines. But in the quiet blur of a winter storm, her car lost control on a back road just outside of Marcus's town. The forest-lined road was nearly empty, snow swirling like ghosts across the windshield when her tires hit black ice. The SUV spun violently and landed nose first into a snowbank, engine hissing and windshield fractured. The seatbelt locked her in place, and a gash on her cheek bled into the collar of her red coat. She faded in and out, the cold biting through the luxury fabric that suddenly felt useless. That's when Marcus appeared. He had just finished a late-night emergency repair at the garage, his hands still smelling of grease and metal, when he spotted the wreck through the trees. No hesitation, no second guessing. He stopped his truck, grabbed the blanket from the back seat, and ran down into the ditch. He didn't recognize her face. He didn't ask for her name. All he saw was someone hurt, someone alone, someone who needed help. As he knelt beside her, checking for injuries, she stirred and blinked slowly. Her lips moved, but the words were barely there. He told her she was safe. He called for an ambulance. And then he did the only thing he could. He stayed, holding her upright to keep her conscious, shielding her from the wind, wrapping her in his own coat, sharing what little warmth he had. In that moment, there was no CEO, no mechanic, no rich, no poor, just two people in the snow, one giving everything he could and the other learning what it meant to be truly cared for by a stranger. The impact had been brutal. Claire's SUV had veered off the icy road with such force that the front end was nearly buried in the snow. Steam hissed from under the hood as the wind howled through the pine-lined road, and inside the crumpled vehicle, Claire Whitmore lay slumped against the airbag, a trail of blood cutting down her cheek. Her eyes fluttered open and shut, barely, holding on. The storm showed no signs of slowing, and the road was too remote for help to come quickly, unless someone happened to be passing by. That someone was Marcus Reed. Driving home from a late-night shift, Marcus noticed the faint glint of headlights buried deep in a snowbank. Instinct kicked in. He pulled over, grabbed the old wool blanket from his passenger seat, and trudged through knee-deep snow toward the wreck. Inside, he found her, shivering, disoriented, bleeding. He didn't stop to ask questions. He didn't need to. With strong arms, he pried open the door and gently pulled her free, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders and holding her upright in the snow to keep her awake. He called 911, gave the coordinates, and whispered steady reassurances in her ear as the wind whipped around them. When the EMTs finally arrived, red lights flickering through the whiteout, Marcus didn't move. He helped lift her onto the stretcher, making sure the oxygen mask was fitted just right. As they loaded her into the ambulance, her hand shot out and grabbed his. Her grip was weak, but her eyes, half closed and heavy, searched for him. "Don't go," she whispered. Marcus gently squeezed her hand back and nodded, staying by her side until the doors closed and the ambulance disappeared into the snow. After that night, everything returned to normal, or so Marcus thought. He went back to the garage, wiping, grease off engines and clocking in like nothing had happened. He didn't know her name, didn't follow up. He'd done what anyone should have done, in his mind. But not everyone agreed. His co-workers laughed it off. "Man, you sat in a snowstorm for some stranger? Hope she sends you a check," one joked. Another chimed in. "You sure you weren't on TV? Maybe she was famous or something." Marcus smiled quietly and kept working. He didn't expect thanks. He didn't need it, but fate had other plans. 4 days later, as Marcus was under the hood of a rusty pickup, the sound of an unfamiliar engine rumbled into the lot. He wiped his hands on a rag and looked up, just as a sleek black luxury sedan rolled to a stop. Out stepped a man in a suit, polished shoes crunching in the slush. He adjusted his coat and walked directly toward Marcus. "Are you Marcus Reed?" he asked. Marcus blinked, cautious. "Yeah. Can I help you?" The man offered a card. "Claire Whitmore sent me. She'd like to speak with the man who saved her life." Marcus had never seen buildings that tall up close. The glass tower loomed over the city like it belonged to another world, a world he didn't come from. He adjusted the collar of his only decent jacket and followed the suited assistant through polished marble halls and into an elevator that moved so silently it felt like floating. His hands were still stained faintly with grease, his boots dusted with the salt of winter roads. He kept his head down, unsure of where to look as the doors opened to the executive floor of Whitmore Industries. Everyone turned. Whispers buzzed across the open space as he stepped into the boardroom. Men in tailored suits and women in sleek blazers glanced up from laptops, exchanging puzzled glances. Some thought he was maintenance. Others assumed he was lost. One executive leaned over and said under his breath, "Claire must be interviewing some community candidate." Marcus stood silently near the long glass table, feeling the weight of the room press down. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not in this place. Not among these people. Then the door opened, and everything changed. Claire Whitmore entered like a wave of warmth. Her scar had healed, but her demeanor had softened. Gone was the icy CEO he'd seen in news articles. This woman, this version of her, was different. She locked eyes with Marcus and didn't hesitate. She crossed the room, wrapped her arms around him, and held on, in front of everyone. "This is Marcus Reed," she said clearly, pulling back to face the room. "This man saved my life." The room fell dead silent. She continued, voice steady, eyes sharp. While most people would have driven by, he didn't. He stopped. He carried me out of a wreck, stayed until help arrived, and disappeared without expecting a thing. I wouldn't be standing here if not for him. She turned toward the board. "Now it's my turn to do something that matters." A murmur rose among the executives. One older man cleared his throat. "Claire, with all due respect, we don't usually bring in outside affiliations for internal growth programs." Another woman added cautiously, "And with no business background, I'm not sure this is a wise strategic move." Claire's gaze turned cold. "You mean because he's not from a Fortune 500 family? Because his hands are dirty from real work instead of shaking investors' hands? He has something none of us in this room do. He has lived the world we claim to serve with our philanthropy projects, and he's earned a place here, not by name, not by wealth, but by character." Silence returned. No one challenged her again. She turned back to Marcus, eyes softening once more. "I started a new division, an innovation wing focused on social impact and community-driven development. I want you in it, fully funded. You'll run your own auto tech education program. I'll back the startup costs. You'll have every resource, every legal protection, every bit of ownership. I'm offering you a real seat at the table, Marcus. Not because I owe you, but because you've already proven you belong." For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. He looked at her, then at the stunned faces surrounding him, and finally down at the calloused hands that had only ever known wrenches and worn-out engines. Everything he had known was survival. But now, someone had handed him a future. As the room emptied and the formality faded, Claire led Marcus to a quieter lounge overlooking the skyline. The city lights below flickered like stars trapped under glass, and for the first time, their conversation felt personal, unguarded. She sat beside him, clasping her hands in her lap, her voice softer now. "I never told the press what really haunted me after the crash," she began. "It wasn't the pain, or the hospital stay, or even the fear of dying." She looked at him. "It was the memory of my father." Marcus listened silently as she continued. "He died when I was 15. Car accident. Rural highway. They said if someone had stopped sooner, he might have made it. But nobody did. Cars kept passing. People assumed someone else would call. I never forgot that. I promised myself I'd never rely on anyone again. And then, there you were." Her voice broke for a second, but she didn't let it show. "You didn't know who I was. You didn't ask questions. You just showed up. You became the person my father didn't get." Marcus shifted in his seat, rubbing the back of his neck. "I get that," he said quietly. "More than you know." He hesitated, then looked her in the eyes. I applied to a trade school when I was 20. I had good hands, loved fixing things since I was a kid. But the admissions officer looked at my file, saw my zip code, saw a juvenile record from when I was 16, and told me I'd be better off sticking to side jobs. Said people like me didn't finish programs. I never went back. Claire's expression tightened, not with pity, but with understanding. So you taught yourself? He nodded. On junkers, in borrowed garages. I stayed late at shops until someone let me help. I read manuals like textbooks, and every time I fixed something, I felt like I was rebuilding a little piece of myself. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was weighty. Shared grief, hard-earned resilience, and the echo of two lives shaped by moments when the world turned cold. Then Claire reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, placing it gently on the table between them. "This isn't just a grant," she said. "This is mentorship. My team, my resources, my legal counsel, my public support, on record, but only if you say yes. I'm offering the tools I had access to when I started. I'll clear the road. Ahead, Marcus. But you have to take the first step." He stared at the folder, then at her. The past had given him every reason to doubt people like her, but something in her eyes told him this wasn't charity. This was respect. And behind her offer was something far more valuable than money: belief. Less than a year after that snowy night, the corner lot off Maple and Pine, once an abandoned tire shop, buzzed with new life. A fresh sign above the doors read Reed Automotive and Training Center, but what it offered was far more than oil changes and tune-ups. Inside, workbenches were lined with young people, some fresh out of high school, others trying to restart their lives, learning how to rebuild engines, troubleshoot diagnostics, and, more importantly, believe in themselves. Marcus didn't just fix cars anymore. He was fixing futures. The scholarship program launched quietly, no press release, no ribbon cutting. Claire had funded it fully, under the radar, exactly as Marcus asked. "This isn't about my name," he'd told her. "It's about theirs." She agreed without hesitation, happy to support from behind the scenes. But she still visited, often dressed in jeans and sneakers, checking in not as a CEO but as a friend, sometimes helping organize tool cabinets, sometimes just sitting in the corner and listening to students share their stories. The community took notice, not through headlines, but through impact. Word spread fast about the mechanic who gave kids a second shot. Parents stopped by just to shake Marcus's hand. A retired teacher dropped off books for the lounge. A local diner started offering free breakfast to his interns every Monday morning. People didn't admire him because he'd been given an opportunity. They respected him because of what he chose to do with it. Claire, once defined by corporate meetings and quarterly gains, found herself slowing down. The crash had shaken something loose in her that she'd buried for years. A desire for connection, not control. Spending time at the center reminded her of everything she'd once wanted to build before the world taught her to be guarded. Marcus, on the other hand, slowly shed the belief that he wasn't enough. For years he had measured his worth in hours worked and bills paid. Now he stood in front of students who saw him as a leader, a mentor, a man who carved a path not just for himself, but for them too. On the 1-year anniversary of the crash, the sky looked eerily similar. The same heavy clouds, the same pale light filtering through snow-covered trees. But this time, they returned to that stretch of road not with fear or trauma, but with quiet reflection. Claire parked her car safely off the shoulder, and together they walked to the exact spot where fate had shifted. She placed a small wooden sign at the edge of the forest. Compassion starts here. They stood in silence, side by side, watching the snow fall softly over the ground. No need to speak. They both understood what that night had meant, what it had broken, and what it had built. Claire reached out and took Marcus's hand, not out of gratitude or formality, but simply because in that moment it felt right. They hadn't just survived that night. They had created something new from its ashes. Not a fairy tale, not a headline, just a better future. For themselves, for others, for everyone who needed proof that one moment of kindness could start something extraordinary. He gave, her warmth in the snow. She gave him a future he never thought he'd live to see. What began as a simple act of kindness on a frozen road turned into a journey neither of them could have imagined. Marcus didn't stop that night because he saw wealth or influence. He stopped because he saw a human being in need. And Claire, a woman used to controlling everything, was forever changed by the moment she had to rely on a stranger's compassion. In the end, their lives weren't just rescued. They were rebuilt, one quiet choice at a time. Have you ever helped someone without knowing who they were? What if that one moment held the power to rewrite your entire future? If you believe compassion creates miracles, share this story with someone who needs hope. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful moments that remind us what really matters in this world.